Hey guys, welcome back to the Friday Vlog, where we discuss activity that goes on here with the Buzz Weaver channel, headlines that are in the news, current events, technology, and items of interest that come up that really kind of center around social media, as that is the format and environment that I work in the most. If this is your first time to the channel, I'd like to welcome you guys here and encourage you to click on that watermark down there in the bottom right hand corner to subscribe, and of course click that bell for notifications so you'll know when the next vlog is out, as well as other content that's here on the channel. In gaming news, for those who have been following the Civilization VI Rise and Fall series of Hojo Tokimune as Japan, I have completed that recording as of this week. It will be 27 in total for that particular series, so I'll be letting those out probably a little more incrementally, so that you guys can get the rest of the gameplay. So those of you who are subscribed and or do have your notifications, just be aware that those videos will be coming out with a little more frequency. And speaking of gaming, DICE this week in regards to Battlefield 5 is really kind of making quite a great deal of changes across the game. Now again, I was kind of anticipating a more modern shooter, so I do kind of have a little bit of a sideways glance look at Call of Duty. I've never really played Call of Duty. I've watched plenty of videos on the games. I've watched other people play it. I've never just gotten involved myself, but you know, Call of Duty might be a little go-to game here for the channel as well, but we'll certainly keep an eye on Battlefield and Call of Duty. So back in 2009, we kind of heard the introduction of a new collectivist ideology into the United States. And it wasn't until 2010 when Glenn Beck kind of introduced these particular concepts and ideologies to the world, and that is social justice. Now you may be wondering, why in the world am I going back to 2009 and 2010 or even talking about social justice? And I think it's important to note here because of recent events that have happened, particularly this week. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is because I think social justice, its ideological formation and its collectivist principle and or foundation kind of really is a good point of reference for those who are Americans and for individuals who are in the UK and in Europe. Now, I'm kind of painting with a broad brush here, but I think social justice is a clear example of a distinction between the mindset of Americans and the collectivist style ideologies and philosophies that are practiced in Europe, particularly like through the EU, or just the general philosophy of a societal foundation of where individuals working together, or what we get the phrase from as the greater good. Now, you have to kind of focus on the fact that here in the United States, that despite your political leanings, the United States pretty much has built itself up on the individualism of Americans. In other words, we kind of pride ourselves in individuality, individual achievements, individual accomplishments, the ability of an individual to achieve great goals, overcome great odds, and to kind of set yourself apart despite the challenges and obstacles and difficulties that you can face, and that being, you know, for females or individuals who may have not had the greatest start in life, have been able to overcome some of the difficulties and challenges to rise above and to take advantage of a system here in the United States to achieve, and kind of is the welcoming mat for those individuals in other countries to come here and try to build a life for themselves and generate business, use our free market system, capitalism, and these sorts of things. Now, of course, again, still painting with a very broad brush here, but I think it's important to make this distinction because working in social media, we're starting to see this week, for example, with Linux. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because in these last few years, we have seen in normie social media, which would be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and parts of YouTube and Pinterest and stuff, is that we're seeing what we call the normie individuals or normies. And I think that's kind of where the social justice warriors started introducing themselves. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that to be derogatory. I'm saying it to be descriptive, to give you guys a perspective of what we are seeing. So this week we learned that Linux is now being hit with what would be called the social justice type wave, where individuals are kind of trying to separate themselves or segregate themselves, or they're introducing another aspect to this social justice warrior manifestation that has risen from social justice warrior and now has brought itself into a new language, introduce a new term, which you guys have all heard, diversity. So basically what's happened is, in the normie social media, we're seeing a lot of individuals, what I would call just your regular everyday kind of folks. They're being introduced to social media in a way that allows them to realize that social media is a captive audience. And so in the real world, where certain ideologies, fundamentalism, and principles, worldviews are sometimes rejected, right? Or for example, like if you're in the work environment or the school environment or certain particular environments, you may not openly express your ideologies, your philosophies, or worldviews. And we can see this kind of clash of interests, say, for example, on social media, where people, kind of get irritated and annoyed by not only, say, like political statements, but even sporting event type things. But I would argue that people are more willing to put up with sporting event type posts than they are perhaps even political. Now, the reason I mention this is because now it has struck the Linux community. Now, we can kind of say, well, how has this social justice warrior movement affected social media, or why am I mentioning social justice type ideology into it? Well, we first kind of saw social justice warrior mentality start creeping into some of the more diverse areas, and I'm using that word differently than diversity. That would be like in the atheist community, the Christian apologetics community, or in kind of like more of the special interest type communities. And now we're kind of even seeing this, as we mentioned in Battlefield 5, coming into the gaming community. Now, people may want to point back to Sarkeesian when she did the whole Gamergate thing, when she was introducing that sense of social justice warrior into gaming. But what's going on this week in Linux is that we're seeing that same mindset being introduced, and people are actually saying that they're going to pull out aspects or parts of their code into open source. Now, if you're not familiar with Linux, it is an open source software program. It is an operating system that has been used for many years. Companies, sometimes even big corporations, use Linux because it's a free software. It's open source. It's created by a community of coders, and so they can use this software without having to pay huge licensing fees to either Apple or Microsoft. So Linux has been kind of one of those dependent backbone operating systems that some of these big companies use for mail clients and other server type things that they use for their computers. But nonetheless, we are now seeing an injection here of kind of this social justice mindset and mentality. I'll leave links down in the comments section or down in the published section for you guys to kind of take a look at that. But also just in this whole climate of this whole thing, we're seeing this overall in just social media too, as we see like social media type platforms, the main television networks, and even Hollywood and comedians and personalities are now getting into social media. They're introducing their influence into it because they now realize that so many eyes and so much attention are in this captive community. And another interesting point that I want to make here, as when it comes to like the differences between, say, Americans and the Europeans, and of course, again, painting with a very wide brush here, I'm really happy to see a lot of my European friends or individuals, there in the UK and in Europe, that are creating their own channels on YouTube, getting a little taste of that sense of individuality, that sense of individual ability to have like your own little business, your own little area for commerce and for influence, and to be able to do things for yourself and make a little bit of a living. It's kind of something we in America kind of take a little bit for granted. We do have a little bit more of the liberties and capabilities to create our own businesses or go into areas that allow us to expand and grow in a free market capitalistic system. Now, Understand, I know that there are plenty individuals in the UK and Europe that are individualists, that are artists and musicians and creators and business people and business leaders, stuff like that. I'm not saying that, that it is something foreign or unusual there in Europe, but the collectivist mindset is probably one of those things that do kind of separate the United Kingdom and Europe from America in that sense of individualism versus social justiceism. But we're seeing kind of these individuals, normies, introduce themselves into what was once kind of a domain of computer savvy individuals, and where we would, you know, have our abilities to communicate with one another in ways that we normally wouldn't through just generalized social media. And that's a whole other topic. But we also see this kind of mindset of ideological movement when it comes to Kavanaugh, right? So we're seeing that there are some additional females coming forward with accusations against Kavanaugh, and some of these are very ambiguous, some of these are very generalized accusations, you know, that he was just kind of associated or was part of or was in at this particular party and so forth. But what bothers me about it is it can trivialize actual victims. And I'm not saying that these individuals aren't victims in some way or in some manner, but what's happening with this social justice movement is that it is precipitating a lot of this kind of mob outrage, mob pile-on mentality by political groups to leverage this captive audience. And I think we're seeing here is that type of movement where we're seeing mainstream media, special interest groups trying to not only deplatform people like with Alex Jones, but these individuals need to tear people apart. They need to completely destroy people. And it's one thing when we saw back in the day, in the younger days, you know, when it was tabloid television or tabloid magazine. Now in a way it is kind of becoming a tabloid social media, where it's individuals who are disgruntled that want to either go after companies or they want to go after people. And we're seeing this with Donald Trump, for example, all the attacks that he gets almost on a daily basis from the mainstream media. And a lot of it is not being properly disseminated. For example, they were talking about how people were laughing at Trump during UN. Well, what he was doing was he was outlining things that he's actually accomplishing, tangible, substantive, actionable things that he is doing, and it's completely alien to individuals who have never heard or known what he's been able to accomplish here in the States, whether it's with unemployment, job creation, GDP increases, economic growth, all these things that people were saying, his detractors were saying were not going to happen. He has far exceeded all these things, and it's completely alien to those that have just heard nothing but negative things about it. And so when we see this social justice movement, this social justice world now elevating itself to this diversity element, it's a very micromanaged mindset where individuals are introducing their own little ideologies, their own little philosophies and concepts into things, and it's kind of really just kind of creating more of a division and more strife and more discord in the world than I think it is really kind of a culminating, joining unity kind of thing. But nonetheless, this week we're now seeing that Linux, the operating system, is being affected by this, and it's really kind of a serious note, because if things start to happen within Linux and these individuals start pulling out code or doing things and changes to code, it could affect things at every kind of level. Your phone, your Android is based upon a Linux design. All the different servers across all the different registers, all across the DNS, all across the internet, you know, how this is going to affect things. But nonetheless, guys, I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. This is a little different Friday vlog, but just something that's just been, you know, just weighing on me this whole week about how social media used to be such a fun, exciting, enjoyable place, and now it's being injected with all this nonsense. It's just so troubling and disturbing. But nonetheless, I wanted to share at least that aspect. That's going to wrap it up for this Friday vlog. Thank you guys so very much for participating here with your likes, your shares, and your comments. Just a little bit of sharing some philosophical, ideological, and worldviews with you. I try to take what can be sometimes complicated and make it a little bit simpler and put it a little bit more into perspective. And perhaps I can touch on any of those particular topics that I went through in this video with you guys in a different video. But nonetheless, I did want to share my particular thoughts for this week because of so much that was going on And so you guys are welcome to leave your thoughts about what's been going on over the years through the internet and in social media, as well as what's been going on politically, maybe even in your own country or here in the States. If you haven't already, guys, and why haven't you, go ahead and click on that channel icon appearing right there on the screen to subscribe, and be sure you click that notification bell, guys, so you'll know when the next Friday vlog is available, along with additional content that's here on the channel. And I will see you guys next week.